The old man's shoes crunched against the gravel, each step a defiance of time itself. At 87, Walter Grayson's frame was a map of wrinkles and resolve, yet his eyes burned with a secret no one could name. Beside him, a stranger cloaked in shadow moved silently, their presence stirring whispers among the wedding guests like wind through dry leaves. The venue was a vision of elegance, a sprawling estate draped in twinkling lights and roses, where Walter's son, James, was marrying the love of his life, Eleanor. The air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the promise of new beginnings. But as Walter approached the grand tent, the crowd parted, their chatter fading into a curious hush. His suit, though worn at the cuffs, was pressed with care, and his cane tapped the ground with quiet dignity. The stranger beside him, a woman, ageless yet somehow ancient, her face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, drew every eye. No one knew her. No one had been told she was coming. James stood at the altar, his smile faltering as he caught sight of his father. It had been years since they'd spoken, years since the fight that fractured their family. Walter had always been a man of stone, unyielding, proud, a carpenter who built walls around his heart as sturdy as the homes he crafted in his youth. James had invited him out of duty, expecting a polite decline. Yet here he was, uninvited guest in tow, striding toward the heart of the celebration. The guests' friends, family, colleagues shifted uneasily. Eleanor's mother, Patricia, leaned toward her husband, whispering, "Who is that with Walter?" Her tone carried the weight of judgment, as if the stranger's presence was an affront to the carefully curated guest list. Walter's daughter, Clara, stood near the bar, her glass frozen mid-sip. She hadn't seen her father in a decade, not since he'd called her dreams of art school a waste of time. Her heart thudded with a mix of dread and curiosity. What was he doing here, and who was this woman? Walter paused at the edge of the dance floor, his gaze sweeping the crowd until it landed on James. For a moment, their eyes locked, father and son, separated by years and unspoken apologies. The stranger's hand brushed Walter's arm, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed, but Clara saw it. There was something familiar in the way the woman moved, like a memory just out of reach. The ceremony hadn't yet begun, but the tension was palpable. Walter's arrival was a crack in the perfect facade of the day. James took a step forward, his bride's hand slipping from his as he approached his father. "Dad," he said, voice tight, "you came." The words hung heavy, neither question nor accusation, but something in between. "I wouldn't miss it," Walter replied, his voice gravelly but steady. He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Lila." No last name, no explanation. Just Lila. Her eyes, a startling green, met James's briefly before she looked away, as if the weight of the crowd's stares was too much. She wore a simple dress, deep blue, that seemed to shimmer faintly, like moonlight on water. Her presence was a puzzle, and the guests were already piecing together their own theories. The music swelled, signaling the start of the ceremony, and Walter guided Lila to a seat near the back. Clara watched them, her artist's eye catching the way Lila's fingers trembled slightly, clutching a small, worn leather book. It wasn't a purse or a clutch, nothing so ordinary. It was personal, precious, like a relic from another time. Clara's curiosity burned brighter than her resentment. She slipped through the crowd, taking a seat a row behind them, close enough to observe, but far enough to avoid her father's notice. As the officiant began, speaking of love and commitment, Clara's mind wandered. Walter had always been distant, a man who spoke more through actions than words. He'd built their childhood home with his own hands, plank by plank, but never knew how to build a bridge to his children's hearts. James had followed in his footsteps, becoming an architect, while Clara had fled to her canvases, painting the emotions she could never voice. Now, here was Walter, defying expectation, with a stranger who seemed to carry her own silent story. The vows were exchanged, rings glinting in the soft light, and the crowd erupted in applause. But Clara's eyes stayed on Lila. During the ceremony, the woman's gaze never left Walter, her expression a mix of tenderness and something deeper, sorrow, perhaps, or regret. When the couple was pronounced married, Lila's hand found Walter's again, squeezing gently. Clara's chest tightened. Who was this woman, and why did she look at her father like he was both a stranger and a homecoming? The reception spilled onto the lawn, where tables groaned under candlelight and crystal. Walter and Lila sat apart, their conversation quiet but intense. Clara, emboldened by a second glass of wine, approached them. "Dad," she said, her voice sharper than intended. "It's been a while." Walter's face softened, a rare crack in his stoic mask. "Clara," he said, standing to meet her. "You look happy." The words were awkward, unpracticed, but they carried a weight that made her pause. "Who's your friend?" Clara asked, nodding toward Lila, who was watching the dancers with a distant smile. "Lila's someone I owe a lot to," Walter said, his voice catching. "She's here to help me make things right." Clara frowned, sensing there was more to the story. Before she could press further, a commotion broke out near the bandstand. A young man, barely 20, stumbled into the reception, his clothes rumpled and his eyes wild. "Mr. Grayson," he called, weaving through the crowd toward Walter. The guests froze, their murmurs rising like a tide. "Tommy." Walter's voice cracked with disbelief. He stood, his cane forgotten, as the young man reached him. Tommy's face was streaked with dirt, his hands shaking as he grabbed Walter's arm. "You're here," he gasped. "I didn't think I'd make it." Clara's breath caught. She didn't know this boy, but the raw emotion in his voice, the way he looked at Walter like a lifeline, shifted something in her. Lila stood, her book clutched tighter, and whispered something to Walter that Clara couldn't hear. The old man's face paled, his hand trembling as he steadied himself against a chair. "Who's this?" Clara demanded, her voice cutting through the noise. Walter's eyes met hers, heavy with something unspoken. "This is Tommy," he said. "My grandson." The words hit like a thunderclap. Clara staggered back, her mind reeling. Grandson? She had no children, and James was only now starting his life with Eleanor. The math didn't add up. The guests' whispers grew louder, a chorus of confusion and intrigue. Lila stepped closer to Walter, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. The word grandson hung in the air like a ghost, haunting the festive glow of the wedding. Clara's wineglass trembled in her hand, her artist's mind painting 1,000 questions where answers should have been. Walter, her unyielding father, stood frozen, his eyes locked on the boy who called him family. Tommy's arrival was a tear in the fabric of the day, unraveling the polished perfection of James and Eleanor's wedding. The guests, caught between politeness and curiosity, hovered like moths around a flame, their whispers a low hum against the band's cheerful melody. Clara's brother, James, pushed through the crowd, his new bride trailing behind, her white dress glowing under the string lights. "Dad, what's going on?" James's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a storm of confusion. Walter's jaw tightened, his weathered hands gripping his cane as if it could anchor him to the earth. "Tommy," he said again, softer now, as if testing the word's weight. The boy, gangly, with a mop of dark hair and eyes too old for his face, looked at Walter with a mix of desperation and hope. Lila, the mysterious woman at Walter's side, placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch a silent command to breathe. "Let's talk somewhere quieter," Lila said, her voice low but firm, like a teacher calming a classroom. She led them to a small gazebo at the edge of the lawn, where ivy curled around the posts and the music faded to a distant hum. Clara followed, her heart pounding, her resentment toward her father warring with the need to understand. In the gazebo, Tommy collapsed onto a bench, his breath ragged. "I hitchhiked 2 days to get here," he said, his voice raw. "Mom said if I ever needed you, you'd be here." He looked at Walter, his eyes pleading. "She's gone, Grandpa. Last month. Cancer." Clara's breath hitched. "Grandpa." The word was a blade, cutting through years of distance. She glanced at James, whose face mirrored her shock. Walter sank onto the bench beside Tommy, his strength seeming to drain with each word. "Your mother," Walter's voice broke. "Rebecca?" Tommy nodded, his hands twisting together. "She told me about you. Said you were stubborn but good. Said you'd help." Clara's mind spun. Rebecca. The name was a half-forgotten echo, a shadow from their childhood. Rebecca had been Walter's apprentice, a young woman who worked alongside him in his carpentry shop 20 years ago. She'd been bright, fierce, with a laugh that filled the room. Then one day, she was gone, no explanation, no goodbye. Walter had never spoken of her, and Clara had assumed she'd moved on, chasing a life beyond their small town. "Rebecca was your daughter?" Clara asked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She turned to Walter, her anger flaring. You had another child and never told us. Walter's eyes dropped to the ground, his silence louder than any confession. Lila stepped forward, her green eyes catching the moonlight. It's not that simple, she said, her voice carrying a weight that silenced Clara's next words. Rebecca was a secret, but not one Walter chose lightly. James, usually so composed, let out a bitter laugh. A secret? Dad, you let us think we were your only family. And now this kid shows up, calling you Grandpa. He ran a hand through his hair, his wedding band glinting. Eleanor, standing quietly beside him, squeezed his arm, her eyes soft with concern. Lila opened her leather book, revealing pages yellowed with age, filled with tight, careful handwriting. This was Rebecca's, she said. Her journal. She asked me to keep it safe, to give it to Walter if the time came. She handed it to Walter, who took it with trembling hands, as if it might burn him. Clara caught a glimpse of the first page as Walter opened Ida's sketch of a wooden chair, unmistakably her father's work, alongside Rebecca's looping script. The sight twisted something in Clara's chest. She'd always thought her art was her rebellion against Walter's practicality, but here was evidence of another life, another connection to him she'd never known. Why now? Clara demanded. Why show up here, at James's wedding with him? She gestured to Tommy, who flinched but didn't look away. Lila's gaze softened. Because Walter's running out of time, she said. He's sick, Clara. He didn't want to burden you, but he wanted to see his son marry. And he wanted you to know Tommy. The gazebo felt like a confessional, its ivy-draped walls closing in as Walter's secret unraveled. Clara's heart thundered, caught between betrayal and the dawning realization that her father's stoic silence had hidden more than she'd ever imagined. Tommy, the boy who called Walter Grandpa, sat hunched, his eyes searching for something in the man he'd crossed states to find. Walter's hands shook as he held Rebecca's journal, its pages a bridge to a daughter he'd never claimed. The wedding's joy, James and Eleanor's laughter, the clink of champagne flutes felt like another world beyond the gazebo's shadows. Clara's voice broke the silence. Sick? She repeated, her tone brittle. What do you mean, sick? Lila, the enigmatic woman at Walter's side, answered when he couldn't. Lung cancer, she said softly, her green eyes steady but kind. Diagnosed 6 months ago. He's been managing, but it's advanced. He wanted to be here, for James. For you. Her words were gentle, but they cut deep, exposing the fragility of the man Clara had always seen as unbreakable. James stepped closer, his jaw tight. You don't get to drop this on us, he said, his voice low but sharp. A grandson? A sister we never knew? And now you're dying? His anger cracked, revealing the hurt beneath. Eleanor, ever his anchor, took his hand, her presence a quiet reminder of the day's original purpose. Walter looked up, his eyes glassy. I didn't know how to tell you, he said. Rebecca, she was a mistake I couldn't face. Not then. I was married to your mother, Clara. I was ashamed. His voice was a rasp, each word a confession carved from years of silence. Tommy shifted, his young face hardening. Mom wasn't a mistake, he said, fierce and protective. She loved you, Grandpa, even when you didn't come for her. His words stung, and Clara saw her father flinch, his shoulders sagging under their weight. Lila knelt beside Tommy, her movements graceful, almost maternal. Rebecca made her peace with it, she said. She wanted you to have this. She nodded to the journal, still in Walter's hands. And she wanted Tommy to know his family. Clara's mind reeled. Rebecca, the woman who'd once filled their home with laughter, had been more than an apprentice. She'd been Familia's sister, hidden in plain sight. Clara's paintings had always been her way of processing pain, but this was a wound too fresh to capture on canvas. She glanced at James, who was staring at the ground, his wedding joy overshadowed by this revelation. The band struck up a new song, and the guests' laughter drifted closer, a cruel contrast to the gazebo's tension. Clara's artists, I caught the way Lila's hand rested on Tommy's shoulder, steadying him. There was a story in Lila's presence, too, one Clara couldn't yet read. Who was this woman, who seemed to know Walter's secrets better than his own children? I need to know more, Clara said, her voice softer now, the anger giving way to a need for truth. About Rebecca. About Tommy. About everything. Walter nodded, his face etched with regret. "You deserve that," he said. "But tonight's James's night. Let's give him that much." He stood, leaning heavily on his cane, and gestured toward the reception. "We'll talk after. All of us." They returned to the party, Walter and Lila moving slowly, Tommy trailing behind like a shadow. The guests parted for them, their curiosity now a low buzz of speculation. Clara watched her father, seeing him anew not the unyielding carpenter, but a man carrying a lifetime of choices. Tommy, too, was a question mark, his presence a living reminder of a past Clara hadn't known. As the dancing began, Lila surprised everyone. She set her book aside and stepped onto the dance floor, pulling Walter with her. At 87, he moved stiffly, but her grace seemed to guide him, their steps slow but deliberate. The guests watched, some smiling, others whispering. Clara felt a pang her father, dancing, with a woman who knew more about him than she did. Then came the twist, sharp and unexpected. A woman emerged from the crowd, her face pale but resolute. She was older, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were unmistakable Rebecca's eyes, green as lilas, burning with purpose. "Walter," she said, her voice cutting through the music. "I came to see you one last time." The guests gasped, the dance floor stilling. Clara's heart stopped. Rebecca alive, not gone as Tommy had said. She stood before them, her presence a living contradiction, her gaze locked on Walter. Tommy's face drained of color, his earlier words, "She's gone." Grandpa now a lie or a misunderstanding that shifted the ground beneath them all. James stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Rebecca?" he asked, as if naming her could make her real. She nodded, her eyes welling. "I'm here, James. I'm here for my son. And for you." She looked at Tommy, then at Walter, her expression a mix of defiance and longing. The journal, Lila's silent vigil, Tommy's desperate journey, all of it collided in this moment, rewriting the story Clara thought she knew. Rebecca's voice was a spark in the tinder of the wedding's fading joy. Clara stood rooted, her artist's heart racing to capture the woman before her, Rebecca, the sister she'd never known, now flesh and blood under the tense golden glow. Walter's cane slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground, as his eyes locked on the daughter he'd lost to time. The guests, sensing the weight of the moment, fell silent, their eyes darting between Rebecca, Walter, and the boy who'd called him Grandpa. James, still reeling from his vows, gripped Eleanor's hand, his face a canvas of shock and hope. Lila, ever the enigma, stepped back, her leather book clutched like a shield, her green eyes unreadable. "You said she was gone," Tommy whispered, his voice breaking as he stared at his mother. Rebecca knelt before him, her hands cupping his face. "I'm here, Tommy," she said, tears spilling. "I never left you." The words were a lifeline, pulling him from the grief he'd carried across states. Clara's mind churned, her anger at Walter now tangled with a longing to know this woman who shared her blood. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice raw, directed at both Rebecca and Walter. The question hung heavy, a demand for the years stolen from them. Rebecca stood, her gaze steady but pained. "I was young," she said. 20, working in your father's shop. We fell in love, but he was married. I left to protect us all." She glanced at Walter, who looked away, his face carved with guilt. "I raised Tommy alone, told him stories of his grandfather. When I got sick, I told him to find you if I didn't make it. But you're here," James said, his voice thick. "You're alive." Rebecca's smile was faint, fragile. "Remission," she said. "For now, I wanted to see you married, James. And I wanted Tommy to have his family." She looked at Clara, then Walter, her eyes pleading for a chance to mend what was broken. Lila spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. "I met Rebecca years ago," she said. "She was my student, then my friend. I promised to bring Tommy to Walter if the worst happened." Her gaze softened, landing on Walter, and to give him her journal, so he'd know her heart. The journal, its pages filled with Rebecca's sketches and words, sat on a nearby table, a silent testament to a life hidden. Clara picked it up, her fingers tracing the worn leather. Inside, she found not just sketches of Walter's work, but letters never sent, addressed to her and James. They spoke of love, of regret, of a hope for reunion. Clara's throat tightened, her artist's soul aching to paint the pain and promise in those words. The band resumed, a slow waltz filling the air, and Rebecca pulled Tommy to the dance floor, their steps tentative but tender. Walter watched, his eyes wet, and Clara saw something new in him: vulnerability, a crack in the stone wall he'd built. James and Eleanor joined the dance, their love a beacon in the chaos, and Clara felt the pull to join them, to step into this new, uncertain family. But questions lingered, sharp as thorns. Why had Walter kept Rebecca a secret? Why had Lila, not Walter, been the one to guard her story? Clara approached her father, her voice steady. "We have time," she said. "Not much, maybe, but enough to start over. For Tommy. For us." Walter nodded, his hand finding hers. "I was wrong," he said, his voice a whisper. "I want to know you both. And Tommy." He looked at the boy, now laughing with Rebecca on the dance floor, and something in him softened, like wood bending under careful hands. The night spun on, the wedding a tapestry of joy and revelation. Clara danced with James, then Tommy, feeling the weight of a family redefined. Lila watched from the sidelines, her role as keeper of secrets now complete, her presence a quiet gift to them all. As the stars emerged, Clara felt the stir of something Nawa chanced to heal, to paint a new story with colors she'd yet to name. She looked at Walter, frail but present, and Rebecca, alive and fierce, and knew this was only the beginning.